We are very excited for this morning's speaker, and I want to give him his full time. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Tilton.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Good morning, Exeter. Now, don't get me wrong. J.D. Slajchert's come through in so many important shots in his illustrious basketball career in high school at Exeter, his high school, and UCSB. But he also holds the distinction of the greatest and perhaps the most important missed shot in Exeter basketball. EA, February 2014. Andover's gym seemed particularly ruckus that night. Maybe because I won't let the facts get in the way of a good story, but more likely Andover, who really hadn't beaten us in several years, was finally up 2 with 1 second remaining. The Andover crowd cheering wildly after JD had missed the first of 2 must-make foul shots, and a disappointing loss seemed imminent. Except we had the red rifle, as we love to call him. J.D. Slajchert calmly and perfectly executed an intentional miss on his second free throw, dropping the ball in the hands of a teammate for the putback tie as time expired. We went on to beat Andover that night, and J.D. propelled us to a Class A championship a week later. Like that night at Andover, J.D. continues to find opportunity in the face of adversity, always enriching the lives of others around him. And now, a published author, a motivational speaker, and a good friend, I'm honored to introduce J.D. Slajchert, the Red Rifle, as today's Assembly Speaker.
Wow, that was quite the introduction. I don't know how I follow that. Thank you, Coach. That means a lot. Before I begin today, I'd like to quickly take a brief moment to thank Mr. Peter Michaela for setting up today's assembly, instructor in English, Mr. Alex Myers, Associate Director Admissions and Head Boys Basketball Coach, who you just met and got to hear from, Mr. Coach Jay Tilton. And then a personal shout out, of course, to my instructor in theater dance and my very own former public speaking teacher while I was at Phillips Exeter Academy, Miss Sarah Ream. And of course, Principal Bill Rawson. Principal Rawson, welcome back home. Thank you to all of you for inviting me back to speak today. But I'd like to particularly point out that I want to thank all of you students from all over the world, country, world, everywhere you are, for being here. I know this is an incredibly unprecedented moment we find ourselves in, and I know that this is not easy. The COVID-19 pandemic that is currently ravaging our country and this world is making life as we know it very different and very difficult. So I want to thank all of you for making the time to be here, but also point out how I know how hard this is, and whether you've been directly affected by this pandemic or not, I'm thinking of all of you, and I promise that we will get through it. You know, the last thing I do before I get ready for any speech or talk I give is I take every page of my speech that I've written, and at the top of it, I just write a simple note to myself. I write, "This is important." And I do that to remind myself that, hey, you're going to mess up. You're going to trip over your words. You're going to say things maybe you didn't intend. But ultimately, that's not really important. What's important is the message that you leave everyone with. And as I do this sort of nervous tick, I am able to keep that at the forefront. This is important. I wish more than anything I was with all of you today in the assembly hall, making eye contact with each and every one of you and telling you this story I'm about to tell. But in a lot of ways, this story I'm about to tell today has never been more important than it is right now. Obviously, again, I wish times were different and I wish we were all in person. But the ability to be here and now in this moment and reach all of you all across the world is a pretty incredible thing, and something that I know we're really fortunate to have the opportunity to do. Smile more. Those are 2 simple words that may seem trivial or insignificant. But today I'm going to be talking about how those 2 simple words changed my entire life. Smile more. Simple, easy. We can always try our best to smile more than we do. We can smile more when We feel like everything's going wrong. We can try and find our best and try and do our best to smile when we feel like the whole world is stacked up against us, as it probably does feel like it is right now. We can smile more when we fail and things don't go our way. We can smile more always. It's important to smile more, especially when you feel like something bad has happened to you. When something bad happens to you, instead of asking yourselves, why did this happen to me? I challenge all of you to ask yourselves, why did this happen for me? And I'm going to tell you all why smiling more is the first step in trying to realize this life-changing phrase and these two simple words really do mean something. Growing up in Los Angeles, California, I was pretty much convinced that I was the biggest deal on the planet. Everything I did or said was for me, about me, and I thought I had problems. I got a C on my chemistry test. My girlfriend broke up with me. My dad didn't get me the car that I wanted. These were the things troubling my life. I grew up in the suburbs, and I felt like I said, like everything was happening to me, not for me. I took the road of least resistance. I did things that most of my peers probably didn't think were very important or relevant. The only thing I really focused all my time and energy into was basketball. That was who I was, and that was the only thing I was. And again, the only person I really cared about was myself. But then I met this little kid that changed my life. But before I met him, I was playing basketball one day at my local high school and a public school in Los Angeles, when this girl who I'd never met before came up to me and said, "Hey, my little brother wants to meet you and play basketball with you." And I sort of looked at her and I said, "Sure, I'll get around to it when I can. I'm a pretty big deal. I don't know if you've heard of me." And that's when this girl stopped and let me get out all my pompousness and boisterousness and loud energy and all that. And she just said calmly, "No, it has to happen next week." And I looked at her and asked, "Why?" And that's when she said, "Because my little brother is 6 years old. And the last thing that he wants to do before he has to go into the hospital for a full year of isolation for a bone marrow transplant is meet you and play basketball with you." That little boy had sickle cell disease, and that little boy and I ended up becoming best friends. I met Luke Bodden that following week, and we got to play basketball together, which, as I mentioned, was pretty much the only thing I cared about. But what really struck me about that moment when I met Luke was when he walked up to me, again at the age of 6 years old, he said, "Why don't you smile more? If I were you, I'd be smiling all the time." Luke understood in that moment how lucky I was to just be a healthy, able-bodied kid. Because those were the things that he didn't get, and those were the opportunities that he didn't have even at that young age. So even at a young age, that lesson was very clear to him, how lucky I was. So following my senior year of high school, Luke went into the hospital for, as I said, a full year of isolation for a bone marrow transplant. And I went to Phillips Exeter Academy to become a postgraduate. And for those of you that know me, you probably are well aware that I was way over my head when I arrived at Phillips Exeter. Not being the academic I surely wasn't, I quickly felt like I was in uncharted waters, and obviously I didn't really fit in with my classmates. Struggling to get by and figure out who I was in this new environment was very difficult. And as I said, it was an incredibly interesting transition in my life. But what started to happen was I started to be around and realize how incredible all the students are at this amazing institution. Their work ethic, their drive, how passionate they are about the things that they do, and how passionate people actually can be about school. But one story in particular really sticks out to me and has stayed with me all these years. And it was when one day we were doing a fire drill in our dorm in Silly Hall, and all of us had to go outside at about 5:30 in the morning and stand in the cold and have one of our teachers go through a fire drill roster to make sure that all of us were accounted for. So we were standing there, and every single time our teacher got to a student that wasn't in line outside, someone had to go back into the dorm, knock on their door, wake them up, drag them outside, and we had to start the whole thing all over. So we were going through this roster in this monotonous sort of manner, and we got to a name of a student that was not there. And finally, it was my turn to go and get somebody. And he was in room 202, so I went up to the second floor, knocked on the door, and nobody answered. I knocked again. Nobody answered. Then I realized the door was unlocked, so I opened the door, looked in. Nobody was in that dorm. I walked down in the hall, nobody was in the hall. I checked the bathroom, nobody's in the bathroom. I walked downstairs and I went up to our teacher calling roll, and I said, "He's not here." Student who was a 16-year-old lower would wake up every single day at 4 a.m. and go out and row on the lake by himself. He never told anyone. He never missed a day. So that was the reason why he was not at that fire drill that morning, was because he was working towards his dreams and never let anything get in the way of that. To that moment, I'd probably never woken up before 6 o'clock in the morning, let alone 4. But that lesson and that moment really stuck with me, because that really embodied the Exeter spirit about working hard and not telling people about it. My basketball career continued to roll along at Exeter that year until I tragically broke my ankle. And it was something that was a setback. And obviously, for someone as in love with the game of basketball as I was, it was a devastating blow. Because of that, I only had a limited amount of college options following my postgraduate year at Phillips Exeter. So I ended up taking what was a walk-on spot at UC Santa Barbara, about an hour from where I grew up. And that was the best I could get. But the good thing was, and I always felt like, at the very least, I could tell Luke that I'd be coming home to play basketball. So that semester, I came home for winter break around this time. And I told myself I was going to go and see Luke to tell him, because again, he was still in the hospital for that year. So I drove down to Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, by myself with my UCSB hat, proud, ready to tell Luke the good news. When I walked up to the 4th floor of the children's isolation unit, and I started to see all of the other little kids sequestered in this hospital. I saw all their eyes looking back at me, afraid, sad, scared. And I met Luke's parents for the first time. And Luke's dad said to me that day, "Hey, JD, I don't mean to disappoint you, but Luke's really not having one of his best days. He hasn't been able to get out of his bed in weeks." And as I turned that corner to go and see Luke, I could see his room before he even saw me. And he had toys and Nerf basketballs and Dallas Cowboys gear everywhere. But he had a photo above his bed. And that photo was sitting there by itself on the wall. And it was a picture of me and Luke the day we met. And I slowly walked up to Luke's window that day. And there was about a foot of glass between us. And I did my best to try and tell Luke, "Hey man, you need to get better because you've got 4 more years of watching me play basketball." And he reassured me, "Jay, I'm going to make it. I'm going to be good. I'm going to get out." And that's when he got out of bed, walked up to the window and put his little hand up to it. And I put up mine. And I swear I've never felt closer to someone in my entire life. So I went back to Exeter that semester. Rehab my injury, was getting ready for a new adventure and coming back home to play. When in my final night at Phillips Exeter in 2014, our entire dorm has a tradition where on the last night at school, we all go out to the football fields and all of the seniors tell stories to the kids that they want to leave them with. To that point, I never talked about Luke publicly. I'd never told anyone about him. I wasn't even really sure there was much of a story, but I stood up there in my red tie and I looked at everyone and I told them the story about my best friend and how I was coming back home to play basketball. The response I got that day was incredible and something that I think about often. But little did I know that that would end up being the story that I ended up telling for the rest of my career. So I arrived at UCSB that following summer. And as much as I hate to admit it, it was very easy for me to fall back into bad habits that I'd had prior to coming to Phillips Exeter. Rehabbing my injury and without basketball, I was pretty lost. My social life was the main thing I focused on. And again, I sort of felt incredibly selfish during those moments. My first 2 seasons at UC Santa Barbara, I didn't even log a single minute. I never even put on a jersey. But Luke made it out of the hospital, thankfully. And even though I wasn't playing, and even though I wasn't doing anything that probably would have made him proud any longer, he didn't give up on me. Luke made it to every single one of my games those next 2 years, home or away, with his entire family. I wasn't playing. I'd be sitting there in a polo watching my brothers take the floor. But Luke made it, and he supported me, and he stood by me, and he used to continue to motivate me. And after every single game, we would go and get pizza together, which was his favorite food. And he could really pack away food. At this time, he was about 8 years old. And he would always sit down right next to me while we were eating pizza and ask me about what was going on in my life. Never complaining about what was happening to him or issues in his own personal struggle and battle, an ongoing battle with sickle cell disease, but say, hey, JD, how are you doing? How are we going to get on the floor? What are we doing to get better? Never giving up on me, even probably when I wanted to give up on myself. So I stuck with it. I stuck with it probably more because he wanted me to than I did. And then Luke's health took a turn for the worst. He'd been back to the hospital several times during those next few years, but never like this. And he was sick and had to return for at least a few weeks. And even though I was getting ready for my junior year at this point, I was still trying to focus on that. But also I made sure that I told myself, hey, I need to go and see him as much as I can. Because if this kid could be there for me, then I needed to be there for him. And one day I was having a particularly bad day when I went to go and see him. Things weren't going my way for whatever reason. And when I walked into his room that day, he could tell. And laying in his hospital bed, Luke asked me, what's going on? So I told him what's going on in my world, my problems, all the things I swore were such a big deal. And that's when Luke looked at me and he said, you know, Jay, I would do anything for your worst day. To Luke, those would have been the best days of his life. To have our problems, to think about the things that we go through that are so-called issues we can't get over. Those would have been the best days Luke ever had. And at 10 years old, this little kid knew that. I went back to school, continued to work, trying to get on the floor, trying to make my best friend proud and make sure he could see me play at my dream school. When I got a call one morning before practice from Luke's mom. Hey, JD, you need to come down to the hospital, and I think it's time to say goodbye. On September 14th, 2016, at the age of 10 years old, Luke Bodden passed away from a stroke. And hours before he passed, I made it down to that hospital, and the last thing he ever told me was to smile more. A month after Luke passed, I ended up starting my first ever college basketball game and earned a full athletic scholarship. But without my biggest fan there to support me any longer, I quickly realized that basketball had lost its importance. It didn't feel like something that I needed to be doing any longer. And it felt like, to be honest, I needed a total change. I thought about all the lessons I learned from Luke, the things he taught me. And I decided, you know what, the best thing I can do is find a way to tell our story. So I started writing. And initially, what was a purely cathartic experience ended up clearly becoming something so much more than that. Over time, it almost became a raison d'etre for me in that I couldn't live without it. Writing every single day, night and day, was the only thing that helped me deal with the loss of my best friend. I had a writing teacher while I was at school that used to always tell us, if you write a page a day in a year, you will have written a 365-page book. I didn't really take to that maybe as much as in the literal sense as I thought, because in about 6 weeks, I'd handwritten a 400-page draft of a novel with nothing but pencil and paper. And I ended up taking it to that professor, and he and I together would retool, rework, get in touch with editors, publishers, and those months turned into months and months and weeks and ultimately years. And I graduated from UC Santa Barbara in June of 2018. And 3 months after that, on the 2-year anniversary of my best friend's passing, my debut novel, Moonflower, was published. And on the first page of my book, it's entirely blank with only 2 words: smile more. Because ultimately I can tell any story I want, or write as much as I want to, or spend all this time trying to make it clear to you guys how important life really is and if you take it seriously. But the best thing I can tell you is to smile more. And that's the most important thing you can take away from today as well. So I was on cloud 9. I'd worked as hard as I could to get this book out, tell his story. And I was going all over the place, just like today, doing speaking events, going on TV. And it was an amazing, incredible experience. But as life would have it, as it always does, tragedy and disappointment would come again. It was a regular night. Nothing out of the ordinary was really happening. A small fire began over in the hills, miles and miles away from my house in Malibu at the time. And I was living at home with my mom, and we went to sleep thinking nothing of it. It'd be out in a couple hours. And fire trucks came flying up the hill at about 4 a.m, trying to get everyone up and saying, hey, everyone needs to evacuate. You need to get out of here. What became minutes to only grab all the things we could, I shuffled around my room, grabbing almost my entire life, what felt like. When I walked out into the hall and I saw that what I grabbed was entirely different from what my mom did. I think you learn a lot about someone when you get to see the things they grab when you only have minutes left in your home. I grabbed things that belong to me: clothes, electronics, laptops, things like that. When I watched my mom grab baby pictures, mementos, things that reminded her of our family. But we evacuated thinking we'd be back soon. This is just an uncomfortable ordeal, but it wouldn't last too long. We drove down to the nearest hotel we could find a room at. And because we'd had to get up so early, I told my mom I was going to try and get some sleep, and I went to sleep on the couch out in the living room of this hotel. When only about an hour later, I woke up and my mom started shaking me, hysterically crying, just in a total heap. She said, JD, look, that's our house on the news burning down. So I sat there with my mom, helpless, watching TV of our own home in Malibu burning to the ground. Just 3 weeks after my book was published, my family home in Malibu burned down in the Woolsey fire. I was devastated. Obviously, it was a terrible event, but was incredibly thought-provoking was how I immediately thought about Luke and all the lessons he taught me about never complaining, never feeling like you're the victim, how somebody else out there has it worse than you do. I thought about him a lot in those first days, and we decided, you know what, rather than canceling all these cool opportunities to go on TV and speak and do all these great things for this book I just written, we're going to turn the book itself into a fundraiser. The day after my house burned down, we started a fundraiser called Moonflowers for Malibu, where 100% of my book sales were donated to the American Red Cross and the Woolsey Fire disaster relief, because I knew my family would be all right. We had plenty of resources and insurance, and we were going to be okay. And these were just things we lost, not people. But so many others in my neighborhood had lost so much more. And I knew it would be important to find a way to give back to those people. And what cooler way to do it honor to my friend than to find a way to use the book I wrote about him to give back, because that's what Luke would have wanted. He would have wanted his story to go on to help others too. From that moment on, we've gotten to go and help hundreds and hundreds of people, traveling all over the place, speaking, doing things just like this, talking about my best friend. But ultimately, the most important thing is that all of you realize you all have a Luke in your lives. You all have somebody that believes in you, maybe more than you realize. And maybe that person also realizes there's something more in you than you do. That person doesn't have to be a little boy with sickle cell disease. Maybe he or she is a teacher, sibling, friend, or parent. These people believe in you and care about you in a way that the same way Luke did for me. It gives you such a unique perspective to think about these people and what they've gone through in their lives, because ultimately somebody out there has it worse. So in conclusion, I hope what you can take away from my story today is that you need to get started on your dreams now. I was a kid that didn't take school seriously. I'd never even really written anything before I started writing my first book, and here I am. It doesn't take all the skill and talent in the world to get started on your dreams, especially if you just get started that one page a day. Find that thing that makes you want to get up at 4 a.m. every day. Find that thing that makes you want to make that person and your Luke in your life proud. Because again, you all have that person in your own lives. I'm happy to also tell all of you today that we are currently working towards turning the real life story of Luke and I into a film. I also work for the Luke Strong Foundation, which is a registered 501c3 nonprofit that supports children who are diagnosed with sickle cell disease. And after I lost my family home in the Woolsey Fire, I became a national ambassador for the American Red Cross, where I got to represent them at fundraisers and community events in some of the worst and devastatingly hit fire zones in California, from the Paradise Fire to the Thomas Fire and others. And as I've gone and traveled and spoken and told this story to other people, the most amazing thing I've always found is that people always want to come up to me and tell me the story about the Lukes in their lives. Again, I know how hard these times are on all of you right now, but we are so lucky to be in the position we're in. As Luke said to me, he would do anything for my worst day. So I challenge all of you to continue to smile more, find ways to give back in your community, but also get started on your dreams, because I promise you that if I can do it, then you absolutely can too. When something bad happens to you, don't ask yourself, why did this happen to me? But find and work towards finding the reason why this happened for you. Out of the suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. The world is going to be a better place with all of you, Phillips Exeter, and I can't wait to watch you all change it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will happily take any questions from the audience using the Q&A feature of the webinar. So please put them in there if you'd like to ask JD anything.
Okay, JD, we have a couple of questions coming in.
Sure.
First one up. Specific to Moonflower, fiction or nonfiction?
So my debut novel, Moonflower, is fiction. It's inspired by the real life story of Luke and I. But the film we've adapted it into and are working towards with a production company is actually going to be based on the real life story. So it's technically an adaptation, technically a original story. But the two are slightly different. But yeah, the book is fiction.
Could you talk a little bit more about your experiences with the American Red Cross?
Love them. Such amazing people. I mean, you talk about real givers and real people of good heart. I got to travel with them for about a month straight right after my house burned down. They heard about my story and sort of took me under their wing, and I represented them in Fresno, Bakersfield, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, LA, and they did these events for other victims of fire, of losing their homes in fires, and I got to meet all of them. And I think that was equally as much healing for me to share this experience with people that had also gone through it, but also recovered. And I still work with them to this day. I even went through my speech last night with one of the CEOs of the Red Cross Northern California division. So they're good friends of mine. Yeah, and I'll continue to work with them.
What makes you smile today?
Man, I think just how alive Luke still is. You know, it's been 4 years since he passed, and I was just on the phone with his mother last night laughing about him and stories we told and how he had like a little arrogant streak in him too. And I still am so moved by the opportunity to share his story with people and make him feel even present to this moment. So that makes me smile quite a bit. Yeah.
What moment was it exactly when you realized you didn't necessarily identify through the game of basketball like you used to? And did you find yourself playing for Luke more than for yourself in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting that question's brought up. When I was writing the speech a few weeks ago and kind of was doing the rough drafts, that was a moment I really couldn't put into words. It's almost like indescribable how that happened. But I do think I remember vividly on the phone with my dad talking about how once I'd like overcome that, climbed that mountain and, you know, gotten a scholarship, was starting, you realize that those were just goals you set in your own head, you know. And I think the loss of Luke really put things in perspective in terms of, hey, like you need to take everything more seriously, not just sports. And that's when I sort of threw myself into writing, and yeah, haven't really looked back since. So.
And how have your experience as an athlete impacted your writing, your activism, relationships today? I mean, are you still in athletic mode, or are you using those experiences and who you are today?
So I would take today as a great example. I'm here today meeting all of you because of my athletic background. Coach Jay Tilton was the one that spoke to Mr. Alex Myers and made this happen. And if it weren't for basketball, I would not be here with all of you. Basketball colored my entire life and is something that obviously shaped me quite a bit. And I still try and keep that little athlete alive in me in everything I do. You know, I think dealing with adversity, fighting for those little moments come from the athlete in me in terms of never giving up. I think that's an incredible lesson I learned and something I still apply to everything I do.
Rewinding back to that hurried, adrenaline-filled moment of the fire, what would you grab?
Yeah, I think about a ton of things I forgot. I wish I would have grabbed more stuff with my mom. My stuff was, you know, I was 23, right? Who has anything that's really important at 23? I wish I went upstairs and ran up to my mom's room and started grabbing more stuff with her, because she had a whole life of things. And I reflect on that a lot in terms of how I keep my space and the things I value. Like, if you have a favorite shirt, wear that thing every day. If you have favorite shoes, wear those, because they can be gone in an instant. And I think you take that metaphor and it's sweet, but apply that to life. Call that person you're thinking of, send them that letter, shoot them that text, send them that email. Your time is not guaranteed. I learned that with Luke, obviously, and that was one thing I tried to really nail in terms of everything moving forward. Every person, I always wanted to just immediately do that thing that came into my mind. So,
can you tell us a little bit more about the Luke Strong Foundation, what that's all about?
yeah, would be happy to. So the Luke Strong Foundation was founded after Luke passed by his parents, Matt and Stacy Bod. It's a nonprofit located in Los Angeles, California, that supports children who are diagnosed with sickle cell disease, which was the same ailment that Luke suffered from. And for those of you that don't know much about sickle cell disease, it's something you're born with, and it is a 95% African-American disorder. And a lot of people that get sickle cell disease have it for life, and it's incredibly expensive. And it takes a real toll on families financially. So at the Luke Strong Foundation, it's pretty simple. We raise money in order to help some of these kids from maybe disenfranchised groups, in order to not only just pay for medical bills, but gas cards, parking, food, anything we can do. And we're still a very young nonprofit, but we're growing and hoping to find other donors and people to help us, and especially around the holidays. These are things that we do to give back to other Lukes.
JD, if you could go back to Exeter again for your post-grad year, what would you do differently? Aside from make those 2 free throws and make that a lot easier for us.
I made a lot of mistakes at Exeter. Absolutely. I was a knucklehead. Coach Tilton knows that. I'm sure some of my teachers on there know that. I would have, taken my academics more seriously, of course. That's the easy answer. But I think too, when you're at Exeter, you realize, you think it's going to last forever, and you think all the people there you think it's a regular place. I was just speaking with Peter Michaela about that before we started the Zoom. Was once I left Exeter and moved back to Malibu, did I quickly realize that not everyone's waking up at 4 a.m. to go row on the lake. You're not really surrounded by that environment as much as maybe you'd like, and I missed it. I miss it still. When my book came out, my Exeter community was the first group of people to get behind it and support it. And I think it just speaks a lot to the people you're surrounded with at that place, and just soak that in. You can go to an Ivy League school or a high academic after that, and I don't know if you're going to have the same brotherhood and sisterhood you'll get at a Phillips Exeter. So that's a very unique part of that place.
Thank you. We have time for one more. It's from perhaps one of your former teachers, Miss Susie here. Welcome back, JD. My Health 504 class discussed resiliency last night as a tenet of discovering one's happiness. The question we posed: how can you achieve happiness without ever experiencing pain in your life? How has your resiliency propelled your success?
It's the only reason for it. Had I never met Luke, had I never lost my home in the fire, I would not be doing the things I'm doing today. Those have just taught me the preciousness of life, the preciousness of moments, people, and also just to get started right away. I thought about this a lot in terms of working on my next projects and novels and things, and there's never going to be a moment when you all of a sudden have all this free time and it's like, great, I'm going to start writing a book today. Today is the day. That doesn't happen. When I was writing Moonflower in college, I just had to make sacrifices. What's really important to me. But what you'll find too, and I think is incredibly unique, is you'll never be more alive in those moments than you are in anything else. Like, you might think you're tired all the time, waking up that early, but I was more alert, more happy, a better friend, a better sibling, a better teammate, because I had a real drive and thing I was looking towards in the future. So I think those all actually work together in the end. But Miss Susie, good to see you on the Zoom call. I'm glad you made it.
JD, I want to thank you for joining us today. Your message is an important one. I've been fortunate enough to have a relationship with you for several years now, and your story is always an inspiration to me, and I'll remember to keep smiling as well.
Good.
For those of you who may not have had your questions addressed, I'm sure JD would be happy to connect with you at a separate time. Please reach out to me. You may email me, and I will certainly find a way to make sure you get connected with
Yeah.
JD
If
Slajchert.
I could just quickly hop in on that, my website is www.jdwritesbooks.com. My email is jd@jdwritesbooks.com. My book Moonflowers is available on Amazon. Please reach out. Believe me, I would not be where I am without the Exeter community. They've helped me immensely. Anything I can do to help any of you, if you're interested in writing or speaking or anything, reach out, have a question. I'd be really, really happy to connect at any time you feel comfortable. If it's at a later date, reach out to Alex, Jay, or me, and we can make it happen. So I want to make that clear to please reach out.
All right. Thank you, JD. Senior class, over and out.
Thank you.